this week we've heard about plans at the state level to introduce a voice to Parliament. Legislation introduced into the lower house, which would allow Aboriginal people to elect 40 representatives from their geographical area, with 12 able to speak on all bills coming before Parliament. I caught up with One Nation MLC Sarah Game, who says she's got some concerns about the bill in its current state, and she's been recently travelling throughout regional South Australia, including here in the southeast, talking with locals about that and a whole range of issues.
I think it is confusing for people because a lot of people I speak to, they assume that we're waiting for the referendum to decide on a voice to Parliament, which of course we are if we're looking at a voice to Parliament on a federal level. But many South Australians don't realise that what's being proposed at the moment is actually a legislative change without a vote in the South Australian Parliament to establish our own state-based voice to Parliament. And that's something that I think is confusing and certainly something that we're against. I can outline it a little bit. What's being proposed and most likely going to go through is to have a local First Nations voice that then essentially reports to a state First Nations voice, which I guess ultimately will have to somehow liaise with the federally established voice. In terms of South Australia, they're proposing having about 40 elected people from the Aboriginal community, and from within that 40, I understand there'll be about 10 that are going to be part of the state First Nations voice. So for me, I guess the point that I'm making is it's very confusing. There's going to be huge extra layers of bureaucracy, and there's money spent millions of dollars on establishing this.
Yeah, indeed. And it feels like this has sort of been raised. It wasn't something that many recall as an election commitment. So where did the discussions of this start, and how far along is the Parliament in terms of progressing this?
That's right. I mean, there hasn't been that much discussion about it, and a lot of people either don't know about it or they're confused. Look, there's a draft bill that's already been put out, which I have read, and I've just got, I guess, a couple of comments on that bill because I wasn't impressed with the bill at all. And I guess my main concern is that if we're going to be having these 40 representatives, which are all going to be paid, a certain amount of money, I think they should have a certain amount of responsibility. And from what I can see, the way the legislation is written, they may report to Parliament, they may produce an annual report, they may meet with Cabinet, but ultimately they don't actually have to do anything from a legislative perspective. And I think that's a problem when we're spending taxpayer money, and more importantly, when we're doing this really to help a portion of the Aboriginal community that are in despairing conditions. We want to make sure that those people who are elected have responsibilities that they do have to fulfil. My understanding is the legislation will most likely go through. A deal has been done pretty much with the Greens and Labor, and they will have the numbers. I do want to point out that I think it's been very disappointing, the Liberal Party. They've been virtually silent on this matter, and everywhere I've gone, previous or current Liberal voters have told me that they're very disappointed that the Liberal Party isn't being more vocal on this, because a lot of people don't want it. And I guess I would like to explain from my point of view why our party is against it and why I think a lot of the people who've contacted me are against it. And it's not actually in the detail. I mean, with regards to the federally based voice, there's been discussion about there not being enough detail. But from my point of view, and a lot of the people I've spoken to, it's really about the actual concept, because I think going back to a position where we are focusing on people's race, treating people differently based on their race, then wanting them to prove and establish that they really are of that race, I think that's a very, very, actually potentially dangerous thing to do and a really backwards thing to do for our society. And I think evidence of that is a lot of the groups that have contacted me that are against the voice, they're faith-based groups, and they really see everyone as equal. And this just fundamentally is wrong to them.
Sarah, are other states taking this approach as well?
Well, that's it. I mean, I have heard some sort of noise out of, I think, Victoria, but I do feel that the motives for South Australia possibly are quite wrong. You know, that the Labor government here kind of want this accolade that we're going to be the first state to get this state-based voice, and that seems to be the most important thing, rather than making sure that it's actually done right. And I guess on that matter, I just want to probably make clear that it is a sensitive topic, and a lot of people feel they can't talk out about it and say what they're feeling. On that, you know, we all want the Aboriginal community to have a voice. We want everybody to have a voice, and I think that's why I've got a particular problem with the name of this legislation, the name of the proposal, because when you're asked, well, do you not want Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders to have a voice? Well, of course we do. We want everybody in Australia to have a voice, and we want them to have the same voice. But the problem with establishing this sort of separate race-based voice is it's very divisive, and also it's very distracting, because we already know what's going wrong in these communities, and actually some of the issues, in fact, I would argue most, are the same across the board. We know the first 1,000 days in a child's life are very important. We know that we need to ensure children are safe, have good nutrition, good support, good literacy. We know we've got problems with school attendance, particularly with our Aboriginal community. We don't get kids at school and they don't get an education. They're not going to gain employment. We're not going to close the gap. We know we need more transparency with money that's being spent. I mean, I've been out speaking with Aboriginals and Aboriginal communities, and they've told me, you know, we don't see the money that's being touted around, and I believe that. And we need to be moving to this needs-based support for people, not a race-based support. And I guess my point is just trying to make clear that it's okay to be against the voice. You know, this doesn't mean we don't want to support people in need, because anyone who's following me knows supporting people in need is a passion of mine. But we need to do that based on need, not based on race. I mean, most people who are in poverty and homeless are, in fact, not Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. And we need to, have a different way in which we fund people, I would suggest.
And you have been travelling around regional South Australia, well, a lot since you've come into Parliament, but most recently you've been down in the southeast and other parts of the state. What sort of conversations have you been having with people?
Well, exactly. I have been doing that. I've had a whistle-stop tour, and I've been to many different places. I mean, one of my favourite things to do, I have to say, when I go out into the regions and talk with people, is visiting the men's sheds and the RSL clubs. So I went to the Narracourt District Men's Shed and also the Mount Gambier Men's Shed, and I've also been to a number of different RSLs. Went to the Mount Gambier RSL, and I particularly love the progress that we've made with men's mental health. You know, when I'm talking with people at these men's sheds, you know, they tend to be older and they've retired, and they're from a generation, I think, when we couldn't talk about mental health. And I'm really always so impressed by how much progress seems to have been made, and we still need to make more progress, but so much progress has been made. They're very open with me about their own struggles, how important those men's sheds are for them, how much they look after each other, and just the social aspect, the connectivity. You know, we're getting into a lonely society, and these men's sheds, I'm really impressed by the people that I've met there, and the whole concept. Really, they're a real lifeline for a lot of people, particularly in rural and regional areas.
That is One Nation MLC Sarah Game speaking with me there.